So hello, firstly, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Samantha Lee. I'm the project manager of the Curlew Life project, one of the projects that's helped tonight happen. And it's my absolute pleasure to be chairing this evening's event, which, as I mentioned, is the second in a three-part series of virtual events focusing on breeding waders and habitat management in the Lockhart landscape. The first event focused on the breeding wader ecology, and the key speaker was Anne-Marie McDevitt, Head of Species in RSPB Northern Ireland. That happened in November, and as I said, these talks will be available online, so if you want to go back, if you missed that talk and want to go back and have a listen and a watch, that can be accessed on the Lockhart Landscape Partnership website. As I said, tonight's talk is going to feature on the sort of habitat management to support breeding waders. So really looking at, okay, we know about their ecology and what they need, so how do we deliver that on the land that we might manage? And the agenda for this evening, we've got three fantastic speakers with us this evening. Each of them are going to talk for about 20 minutes. And then we'll have a sort of panel Q&A session at the end. So if you do have a question, do feel free to put it in the chat box whilst the talks are going, and then I'll try and sort of round them off at the end. If your question is to a specific person, please also highlight that within your questions. So say something like, at Brad Robson, blah, 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 where are your curlews this year? Just before we get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about the two projects that are helping to facilitate tonight. So the first is the Lockhart Landscape Partnership, which I may refer to as LELP. And this partnership is supported through funding through the National Lottery Heritage Fund and is currently delivering a suite of projects to protect, promote and conserve the unique natural, built and cultural heritage of the Lockhart landscape. And as part of LELP, we're working on several projects to conserve the habitats of wildlife in the region, including breeding waders. And the project currently supports 4 organisations in the region who are carrying out brilliant work to restore habitat for waders, including curlew and snipe. And in today's workshop and the next workshop in January, you'll hear a little bit more about the work that's been carried out through LELP and how these measures have been taken and been successful in ensuring wader habitats are enhanced and conserved. So the second project is Curlew Life, or Curlews in Crisis. This is a 4-year project which just got going this year, so it runs until 2024. As I mentioned, I might be slightly biased because I'm the project manager of this fantastic project, and we've got a number of staff that help deliver the project at their sites in Northern Ireland with us this evening. But this project is delivering emergency action to halt the decline of curlews across 5 priority landscapes in the UK, so also in Wales, England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and it's funded by the EU Life programme, but we also have a number of in-country partners as well. So for our sites in Northern Ireland, it's actually funded through the Dara Environment Fund as well, supporting delivery at our Northern Ireland sites. And this delivery includes direct intervention, habitat management, and also working with communities to raise awareness of curlew across these sites, as well as building up our volunteer network and influencing policy to ensure that curlews and other breeding waders are maintained long term. So really using case studies from all of our project sites, so beyond 2024, to ensure that we're getting things right and in place for curlews for the long term. And especially in Northern Ireland and Wales, this is where we're really focusing efforts because the populations are so low, with only roughly 20 years before we could face national extinction in both of those areas, which is why work in Northern Ireland and Wales is particularly critical. So I will now move on to introduce our first guest speaker of the evening. So welcome to Michael Mahog, who's the Northern Ireland Vice Chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Michael farms a 250-hectare suckler cow enterprise in County Antrim, which includes the conservation on a number of protected sites in Northern Ireland. He's passionate about the environment and rare breeds, and with a background in ecology, Michael facilitates work with farmers in the Lough Neagh area environmental farming scheme, focusing on delivering for priority habitats and breeding wages. Michael is also interested in how the public and the market can better support nature-friendly farming produce across Northern Ireland. So welcome, Michael, and if you would like to kick us off for tonight's speakers.
Okay, share my screen here. And if someone can confirm that the slides are showing.
Yeah, we can see them and they're all in slide view.
Good. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. It's a couple of things. I wasn't expecting such a geographical spread of the audience tonight, and that's wonderful. And welcome to everybody if it's your first time in Northern Ireland. Going to talk a bit about, I've been asked to talk a little bit about nature-friendly farming network. The things have changed a little bit since the introduction was written. I've stepped up and I'm now Northern Ireland chairman of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. The Nature Friendly Farming Network is a group that is a UK-wide group, and there is a Northern Ireland committee and an active membership here in Northern Ireland. And I was asked in my presentation to talk a little bit about that overview of what the Nature Friendly Farming Network does in Northern Ireland. And then within that, talk a little bit about my own role in the farming that I do, and then talk about landscape scale agri-environmental schemes through the environmental farming scheme. So within Northern Ireland, we have a very active committee in the Nature Friendly Farming Network. We have a whole range: arable, beef, sheep, dairy, farm shop folk, horticulture, craft tourism, and forestry interests. We're increasing our membership regularly. At the last Balmoral show, we increased our membership by 10%. We got over 50 new members at the show. But we've got representatives from a wide range of farming backgrounds and farming interests, and a lot of folk who are actively involved in managing their land for nature and with nature in mind. My own interests in farming and as a nature-friendly farming on the livestock side, I farm Irish Moyle cattle, and I graze nature conservation, high nature value sites in the Belfast Hills, up in Ballymena, an area owned by the council, and also have just taken on grazing of the historic palaces and gardens, 10 hectares of land within it, where we're converting improved agriculture through conservation grazing and management across 2 species rich meadow, and graze a national nature reserve on the shores of Loch Ness, a site which once was of breeding wader interest, but like a lot of the shores of Loch Ness, over the years there's been encroachment of woodland and scrub, something I think which has happened quite a lot in County Fermanagh as well. And as a farmer, I think of my outputs, and while you may be interested in nature conservation as a farmer, as I am, there still is a business to be done, and there still is the economics of making some money at the end of the day and making sure that you've got a viable business. So I breed pedigree cattle, Irish Moyle traditional cattle, and I finish some as beef and sell those as quality beef, and some as weaned calves, and work through a system like this. But I've other outputs on my farm. I've got a micro generation, 80 solar panels, so I produce electricity and sell that to the surplus to the grid. But also I see one of my outputs, as well as my pedigree cattle and my stock, I see wildlife as one of my outputs. And working on a large site, Slieve-na-Cloy Nature Reserve, an ASSI up in the Belfast Hills, purple moorgrass rust pasture with breeding snipe, and in fact 2 bubbling curlew early in the year this year in the area. It's very important that I see wildlife as one of the outputs from my farm, and the habitat and the biodiversity that goes with that. And of course, carbon, the sequestration of carbon is an important output. And the amazing grazing that my cattle do on that land keeps the biodiversity, habitats and wildlife and carbon at a high level. And the other output, of course, is the landscape. The landscapes across Northern Ireland, there are traditional landscapes. On that site that I graze up in the Belfast Hills, we've got old famine ridges or cultivation ridges, which were dating back to the mid-1800s, where the land was under much more pressure, but the cultivation ridges still show in places. And this is a medieval cattle enclosure on the site, which was excavated by a community archaeology project. And with Irish Moyle cattle there, it's a site that may have been similar going back over a few millennia, that this ancient breed of cattle would have been grazing that sort of a site all that time. NFFM is an organisation which is about getting information and sharing information between groups of farmers who have a like mind. And over the last year, we've held a number of events. So we have Nature Means Business is something that is at the core of what we do. We feel that it's really important that if you look after nature on the farm and you are nature positive, that isn't financially negative to you. That you can be in the black when you're farming in a green way, and we see that as very important. We also held, along with other partners, Food Farming and Land Convention 2020, and we had a Food Farming and Land Conference last year. We had 800 people signed up to it, speakers talking about biodiversity, about nature on the farm and about other aspects. And we're holding another event. We at the moment, the proposed date is the 1st and 2nd of March next year, that we're going to hold another event, this time looking at the outcomes of COP26 and farming for carbon and with carbon, but also in terms of food use and our kind of total agricultural economy and how carbon is at the heart of that. Very poignant at the minute because there are 2 carbon bills in our assembly at the moment going through. We're involved with the Carbon Literacy Project last year, working with the Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful, and some of our members involved in various areas of farming put forward what they're doing on their farms to work towards net zero and how they're trying to manage carbon on their lands. And this is something Nature Friendly Farming Network will be producing a document and launching that at the Oxford conference this year about carbon and the management of carbon on farms. And possibly one of the big things that we did last year was we decided as an organisation in Northern Ireland to bring forward a motion through the Northern Ireland Assembly. John Blair from the Alliance Party sponsored it, and this was a motion on nature-friendly farming. This was passed eventually, it went through the ERA committee and was passed eventually by the Northern Ireland Assembly, despite a few amendments being tabled by the Agriculture Minister. The original motion was passed, and that this Assembly recognised the vital role that nature-friendly farming must play in tackling the nature and climate emergencies, and at the same time as providing a profitable future for the sector. Now, what's very interesting in that is that the environment strategy for Northern Ireland has just gone out to consultation, and nature-friendly farming is mentioned on two areas within that as a way forward for the future of the environmental sector working with agriculture within Northern Ireland. There's an agricultural discussion paper due to come out within the Assembly probably before Christmas, and we're hoping that that's going to also match that same hope, and that nature-friendly farming will be there. And that's going to be important for all of the farming sector in Northern Ireland as we try to keep our nature-friendly farming approaches on our businesses and with our businesses. So policy is very important, and the work that we do in nature-friendly farming, response to climate change, We responded on the peatlands policy, the food strategy, the green growth strategy, the environment strategy is out at the moment for consultation. And as I say, an agricultural strategy or bill that will be coming forward in the not too distant future for consultation. And we're very active in terms of putting forward views of the nature friendly farming network within those. We believe very much that that the agricultural policy and future agricultural policy should help farmers producing safe, healthy food. That's vitally important. Maintain the current levels of agricultural support, redirect farming payments towards mainstreaming nature-friendly farming. And we recognise that a shift towards a more nature-friendly approach is not just good for wildlife, but the long-term survival of Northern Ireland's farming community, delivering broader benefits. And we want to make sure that future schemes are practical, easy to deliver, accessible to all farmers, and ensure that the quality of produce from the industry reflects the quality of the land we farm, with market recognition for the of value, suitable reward for nature-friendly products. And this is a little bit about how we can help. So Nature Friendly Farming Network is there, support to members, support to DAERA and to MLAs, sharing positive farming messages, and to lead by example. And we've got a really good committee that is doing that at the moment. And I'll just pass on with that one. So one of the projects then that I've been working with as an environmental farming planner, but also leading an environmental farming group. So within Northern Ireland, our agri-environment scheme here is called the EFS, the Environmental Farming Scheme, and it's at 3 levels. It's at an introductory level, and that's where any farmer can apply and take on a number of prescriptions on their land and get payment for that. Those are to help biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and water quality. There's then a higher scheme which is based on high nature value land, European protected land, local designations such as areas of special scientific interest, or the priority habitat land. And a farmer can enter a scheme there, and this is where area payments and annual payments can come from managing high nature value land in a particular way, managing habitats. Breeding waders come into that, and there are other aspects to the project. The area that I work within is Lough Neagh, mainly within the Ramsar site, but also to the northeast of Lough Neagh, there is an additional scheme that we're running through the Lough Neagh Partnership, which is looking at the northeast rivers, the rivers that drain off the Belfast Hills and drain into Lough Neagh, where water quality traditionally hasn't been good. And we're working with farmers in the wider scheme along here to encourage them to be more conscious of the way in which they farm their land. So we're doing soil testing to see if all of the fertilizer that's put on is required. We're doing looking at fencing off riparian zones and looking at other aspects of that. You'll see down at the southwest corner of Lough Neagh is an area with some red areas. Each of these red areas is a farm that has entered into the environmental farming scheme over the last number of years. And there's an area down in the southwest here where there are curlew still breeding, and there's a population of curlew here. I'll talk a little bit more about that site. And just up along here is an area where there is a bit of land that I want to just show you how at a landscape scale it's possible to influence the way in which a site can be managed. But Portmore Lough, there are breeding waders around Portmore Lough on the east side of the lough, and of course in winter time the fields down around the south and the southeast of Lough Neagh are home to large swan and breeding wader and geese flocks. So it's a very important area. Lough Beg at the top, there's an environmental farming scheme which RSPB is running, and again a large breeding wader interest in this particular area as well. I'm going to talk about an area Killycolby, which is on the western shore, just above Ardbow. And this area had high breeding wader interest from Kells Point up to Blackers Rock in the past, and in past surveys going back to the 1980s, there were good numbers of breeding waders along that part of the loch shore. With that in mind, and with other botanical interest and woodland interest in the area, Northern Ireland Environment Agency has purchased certain areas along this bit of shore. And that's about 5 mile stretch of land there. It's a long stretch of land. And so you've got a block of land there, which is Northern Ireland Environment Reserves. And Kells Point was a well-known breeding wader site along the shores of Lough Neagh. Looking at EFS agreements overlaying above these, you can see that a farmer who is renting the Brook End National Nature Reserve from Northern Ireland Environment Agency has also gone into a higher level environmental farming scheme. But all of these little areas here are farms which are part of the environmental farming scheme. And you can see that beginning to pick up areas along the shore and beginning to piece together a bit of connectivity there within that. A project was carried out by the Lough Neagh Partnership last year, which looked at fields that are unmanaged and in unmanaged land areas. And these areas are the hatched areas, and beginning to show that there are also then bits of land which are unmanaged. And also then outside of the land parcel information system, so this isn't part of agricultural land, therefore isn't eligible, is the area here at Blackers Rock, this bit that protrudes in the northern section, which is owned by a local gun club, and another area of land further down. So there are areas which aren't eligible for environmental farming schemes. But if that's all pieced together, you can see that there's interesting unmanaged land. There's land that is owned by in Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and land in private ownership that is in under farm schemes. And this gives an excellent opportunity along the shoreline of Lough Neagh to look at this as a nature recovery network, where we, through our environmental farming scheme, can go along and can now start to think about targeting certain farmers along here to see if we can encourage them to join the scheme, to fill these gaps and make shoreline connectivity there, and to come up with an overview of a plan that will look at the breeding wader aspects of this, look at the woodland aspects of it, and look at the farmland, the species-rich grasslands, mainly purple moorgrass, rush pasture areas, but shows that there's great potential in mapping these areas together and looking at them to target where we can actually work and develop nature recovery networks. Back to the map, and I mentioned down at the southwest corner was the Curlew area, breeding curlew. And historically, this site, this is the River Blackwater coming into the loch, bit of the loch shore, and a large area of peatland that occurs in that part of Lough Neagh. These peatlands have a very interesting history in that when the Royal Schools in Dungannon and Armagh were given their charter, the Department of Education at the time, or the government at the time, bought up areas of peatland and farmland. Some of the farmland was leased to give money to support the schools, but the peatland, peat was extracted to heat the school and to be used in the school canteens and for cooking. These areas were owned by the Department of Education up until very recently. The area is called Derrylochan, and the area in purple are the large areas of peatlands. Lough Neagh Partnership, through a project, has taken on ownership of that. But this also coincides with an area that still has a population of curlew breeding in this area of the southwest corner of Lough Neagh. And we've been working very closely on the environmental farming scheme, again, to pick up little stripes of land and get more and more farmers involved and engaged in this project to manage their land in a way that is favourable for breeding curlew. So just to show again, this is about a 4 or 5 square mile area. It's a large area, and there's a lot of farms within this, a lot of land within this that has come into the environmental farming scheme and is showing a very positive approach to how we can work at a landscape scale to manage this land. So if we overlay again the land which is either abandoned or unabandoned land that is within the environmental farming scheme, we can see that there's great potential in this area for a nature recovery network along the River Blackwater. Now, what I haven't shown here, but on the other side of the Blackwater is the large area of peatlands in and around Peatlands Park, NIEA owned nature reserve there, and other sites in that area. But I focus particularly on the Derry Loughlin lands. So that's more or less presentation that I've got for you tonight. Thank you very much for listening. I'll just go on a little bit onto what our unmanaged land project actually showed in the area. Within a 5-mile radius of Lough Neagh, we identified over 2,000 unique sites mapped as unmanaged land. This is land that we picked up from orthophotography. 4,000 hectares with that identified as potential unmanaged land. And I'm thinking there's a big read across here to the Lough Erne area, where there'll be a similar large areas of land in and around Lough Erne that will be in the same sort of situation. 2,400 hectares of this is classified as woodland, 1,200 hectares as bog, and grasslands about 500 hectares. There's a remainder of other habitats. And this is very important for future agri-environment policy, both within the Lough Neagh area, where over the last 20, 30 years, a lot of land has gone from potential breeding waders land into woodland and scrubland. But along with that, there is the sort of the way that the departments are looking at carbon sequestration and the opportunity for more woodland in Northern Ireland. And there's a balance to be had and a discussion to be had there. And putting this into policy context, DAERA has a target announced by Minister Poots in 2020 that they want to plant 18 million trees in Northern Ireland, 9,000 additional hectares by 2030. Well, if we go back to the figure that we've got here, that we reckon we found around 2,400 hectares of woodland. We also did a project looking at hedgerows within this area, and we've discovered that there's another 2,500 or so hectares equivalents of hedgerow in this area. So we're reckoning that within this area, 5-mile radius of Lough Neagh, we found about 5,000 hectares of woodland already that would go towards the Minister's target. And I'm not sure that all of that or much of it has been included in any of the data that are known about for woodland existing within Northern Ireland. A lot of that is more or less hiding in plain sight down there. So that's my presentation.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael, for a great talk. I really enjoyed your, it's all right to farm, you can farm in the black when farming in a green way. And I think those maps are really great for demonstrating not only all the great work that you've already done, but also the potential for future work and just connecting all those landscapes up. So the future certainly looks bright for breeding waders in the areas that you're working. So really great talk, thank you. So to introduce our next speaker, which is Alan Morrow, who's Senior Countryside Management Advisor at the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Northern Ireland. Alan works throughout Northern Ireland with a focus on the protection and restoration of habitats, including those for breeding waders, and how habitat management can be carried out within the Northern Ireland Agri-Environment Scheme. So over to you, Alan.
Okay, I'm not sure, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh. Nothing coming up?
Still not yet. Yeah, it's all just got you and your lovely bookcase in the background.
Oh. Doesn't seem to be coming up.
Oh no, for everyone on the call, we had a brilliant practice one. We really nailed this just before going online. You definitely hit the share the screen button.
Yeah. Try and load it again, Samantha.
Okay, no problems. I suppose we could, did anyone have any questions quickly for Michael whilst we wait for the presentation to come up? Actually, I haven't got any in the chat bar.
Oh, very quiet, Sam, but I'm sure they'll come in later on.
I know. Oh, here we go. Here's one. How did you get all the farmers involved in the scheme, Michael?
So there's a variety of ways of working. The scheme is publicised widely throughout Northern Ireland as a scheme that can be entered. That's the first thing. So people will apply for the scheme, but we went along to within the area. We held open events. We talked about what we were doing on open nights with farming groups. We went to farmer supplies and put leaflets and bills up there to say what was happening, and that's really how it was done. And then we actually targeted some areas where we knew that there was a lot of breeding weight or interest in high nature value land, and we would have gone around local farmhouses and so on. And that was kind of during COVID as well, and either called on doors before COVID or when COVID hit, putting leaflets through doors, just giving addresses and numbers that people could contact. So that's mainly how we did it, and then followed up by chatting with the folk and helping them enter into the schemes.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And in that time that you answered that question, we now have Alan's talk up. So Alan, it's still just on presenter mode. So if you can click the screen with the play button in the top left hand, I think that's the one that worked before, isn't it? So it's just the right, so it's the furthest right icon in the top left hand corner. That one, yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully that should work.
Okay. Are you seeing it now?
It's still just in notes view. That's definitely what we did in the run through. I'm wondering whether maybe click slideshow. Or what we could do, not as pretty, you might be able to shrink the notes section so that this main slide just shows up a little bit bigger, and maybe zoom in on your screen.
What are you seeing now, Samantha?
We still just have you in presentation mode. I wonder whether, because it looks like you're clicked onto the actual slide, so I wonder if you just click into some sort of empty space, and then maybe try pressing slideshow at the top. If not, I'm wondering whether if people can see it in this format, not aesthetically ideal, but we might be able to just carry on as it is, and you can just click between the slides.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if we can't get it to play, I wonder whether it's just, I don't know, the size of it. We might have to just continue. Oh, I've had a suggestion of hit F5.
You're good?
No good. I think we're just going to have to carry on as we are, I think. We can still see your slides.
Okay.
Yeah, you might just want to, if you've got any notes in your presentation, then you might just want to shrink that section. But otherwise, I think we should probably just carry on as we are. But it's a shame because those of us on the panel definitely saw this work minutes before we went online.
Okay. Right. Well, there's enough time. I'll push on here. So, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me along. I've learned quite a bit already from Michael's presentation. I'm glad to hear him mention EFS several times in that. So, thank you for that. I manage the DERA EFS hire scheme. Now, coming along tonight, I wasn't just sure who I was going to be speaking to, but the DERA EFS hire scheme, this is really where farmers have land within designated sites, SPAs, SACs, but a bit more about that later. I'm conscious that a lot of you won't know about the scheme, so there's a lot of terms here I don't want to go over that just leaves everyone lost. So I'll briefly explain how the scheme works and move on then to some details how it works for breeding waders, and hopefully this will provide you with at least a flavour of what we're trying to deliver here. I mentioned at the outset, and Michael really has touched on some of this, or certainly I've taken this out of his presentation. EFS, while we promote it heavily, like many other initiatives, will not in its own reverse the decline of the curlew. We're long past where any one initiative will deliver on that. Very much a collaborative approach is needed, combining the efforts of others. Very often carrying out complementary management, but for different reasons altogether, but certainly complements what we're trying to do for curlew. And if working collaboratively like that, there is a much better chance of us tipping the balance in favour of the breeding waders. I'm going to try and move the slide on now. Do you see another slide now?
It hasn't moved on, no.
Oh. Has that moved on?
Oh, maybe it says resume slideshow. Because it's still on the first slide.
Okay.
Okay, I'm hoping it's loading because the screen's gone very odd all of a sudden. But we'll give it a couple of minutes to gear into action.
Yeah. I better explain what's happened. Someone else has taken control of my screen, so.
The joys of IT.
Sam, I'm just wondering, is there a copy of the presentation at all?
No.
No?
Well, yeah, I could have emailed it to you.
Yeah, so if Heather has the email or Sam has the email,
Yeah.
we could, if you just say next slide, please, Alan, and somebody.
Yeah, tell me this. See, in the interest of not wasting people's time, do you want Brad to go ahead with his talk, and I'll come in after that?
Yeah, should we do that, and we can come back to you?
And I'll email this to you. I'll email this to you, Sean.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, well, Sean, you're taking responsibility now. Okay, right. Well, if you stop sharing your screen, and then Brad, are you all right to step in slightly early doors? Oh, you've got Heather on hand. It's a cheat. Okay, well, apologies for that. But we will move to Brad Robson, who's our third speaker for the evening, and we'll come back to Alan. Now, Brad is the site manager for some of our reserves, including the Lochern sites, day-to-day responsible for the day-to-day operation of the Fermanagh reserves, Portmore, Lochbeg and Lochfoyle. I hope I've said those right. And he's worked for the RSPB since 1992 with a focus on curlew recovery, breeding wader habitat restoration. And Brad and the team have been successfully monitoring waders in the region and restoring habitats throughout the Lochern landscape. So over to you, Brad, if you are ready.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Yes, so I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about the specifics of the kind of habitat management that we've undertaken on Lower Lochern Islands for a lot of years, and kind of looking a bit at some of the more the more detailed aspects of it. So I'm not too au fait with all of this gadgetry either. Sorry. I can't see my side of the screen. It's all of the that's it. Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about the some of the islands that we manage, and particularly in Lower Lochern, and about some of the habitat management that we've developed over the years, particularly focused for the benefit of breeding waders. So RSPB currently own or manage 47 islands and mainland sites around Lower Lochern, and in addition to that, we have Sean Woods, who looks after the off-site management work in Upper Lochern. So between the two teams, we can cover the whole of Fermanagh. So you can. Sorry, I'm still really not sure about this. What's actually happening? Okay, yeah. So, so the image isn't that great. I hope you can see in the image of Lochern, you can make out the blue areas throughout Lower Lochern. They're areas that are owned and or managed by RSPB. The green areas down to the bottom are Sean's work working with farmers on sites across the Upper Loch. So essentially, I'm sure a lot of people here will be very familiar with the layout of County Fermanagh, but for those of you who don't, Lochern comes down flowing in from County Cavan in the southwest of that corner of that map. The water flows through a very interesting landscape, which has at times held huge numbers of breeding waders. Unfortunately, it's probably not, it's not back at those great numbers of birds that were there back in the 1980s, but essentially there's still a large area of very good habitat in the Upper Loch to benefit breeding waders. So the water flows down through Enniskillen and then comes out into Lower Lochern and passes down through those pale blue areas, all of those islands which we manage, takes a bit of a left turn and heads down past Castle Caldwell and back into the river, which runs down to Baleek and eventually down to Ballyshannon and runs out into Donegal Bay. So so the islands that we manage, this one here, Horse Island ASSI, is owned by NIEA, It's been managed by RSPB on behalf of NIA for a number of years now. And one of the features of Horse Island is, most of the islands are effectively drumlins, and Horse Island is the largest of those drumlin islands. And one of the key aspects of this, one of the real benefits to us as site managers when we're looking at breed and wader habitat management, is that the larger area the site is, naturally the greater variety of features that island will hold. So Horse Island back in the 1980s held fantastic numbers of breed and waders, but at the same time there was an awful lot of scrub growing along the low-lying shores that has been removed since then. What we really want to do is have a mosaic across a site like this, which can benefit particularly the 4 key species of breed and waders: curlew, lapwing, redshank and snipe. It really comes down to the detail of what we look at and what we try to create through the winter months in order to provide the ideal conditions for birds that come back in spring the following year. So RSPB don't own any livestock of our own in Fermanagh. We've worked with local graziers for many years, and in fact some of the graziers which provide livestock out to the islands have been operating on those islands for decades. In general, we use typical continental crossbred cattle throughout the breeding season, and then as we get back into the late autumn and the colder weather, we change over into some more hardy beasts. So one of our graziers, after a number of years, turned up one day with his cattle trailer and turned up with a small herd of Highland cattle. And these animals have made a huge difference in terms of our success, in terms of creating suitable habitat and a mosaic of taller and shorter vegetation for the birds in the following year. So essentially these animals can continue through the winter months without really losing condition themselves, but also they really turn the corner in terms of what the structure of the vegetation will be like in the following spring by staying out so late into the season. Once we started using belted galloways in the Highlands here, it really had a massive impact on our management of the sward. We've had a lot of you will know that there's been cots operating out on Lower Loch Earn for very many years in terms of transporting goods and materials and livestock between islands. But an RSPB had our own vessel made by Joe McGee back in the very early stage of the 1990s. But eventually that vessel kind of came to the end of its time, and we were very fortunate in order to get funding through CAB to build a new cot which would facilitate our operations. So you can see this vessel here that's named after Joe himself, and you can also see one of our Susi tractors, which this vessel is very capable of transporting around the islands, and it's really transformed our operations, particularly in bad weather. The operation's much safer than it ever was in previous years, to be honest. So the grazing only takes us so far, depending on the species that we're particularly targeting. So in this case, Finbar Cross, who's the man with the strimmer in his hands there, and myself back in the early 90s, realized that the grazing that was taking place on the islands was all very well in itself, but it didn't really seem to be making a difference to the population of some of our key species. So we were down to 3 pairs of lapwing and only about 4 pairs of redshank. And curlew were doing better at that time, but unfortunately we're beginning to decline across the suite of islands. So what we decided is that we really needed to look again at the detail and to create ideal conditions for breeding waders. And so I think this slide here really kind of shows what we're trying to create. So it was formerly very rushy, kind of waist deep. Soft rush is quite common in various parts of West Fermanagh. It's very wet. And we decided that we would go in there and we would start off by strimming patches in order to encourage lapwing to come back onto the site. And that very simple change in our operations had really quite considerable success. So not only, I mean, I'm sure most people listening to this will know fine well that lapwing need to have very short vegetation in which they can nest. They tend to nest on small hummocks. They, as most breeding waders have, they lay 4 eggs. And so the birds would come into these very open areas, and very quickly lapwing populations started to increase as a result. We were very pleased about that, but the thing that came as a bigger surprise to us was that if you see then where the longer area of vegetation is just slightly to the right of the image and looking down onto the loch shore, as we strimmed areas in order to attract lapwing, we found that redshank moved into the areas of longer vegetation very quickly. And in fact, within a very short period, redshank populations started to rocket, really. And I think we went from something in the order of 21 pairs of redshank to 97 pairs of redshank over a number of years. So we were, it gave us a lot of confidence to then expand the type of habitat management through the winter months, and particularly the early stages of the following spring, in order to benefit breeding waders. It wasn't always quite like that. So this is a photograph of Horse Island, the same island that you saw at the very beginning of the presentation. When I first came to Fermanagh back in the early 90s, I looked back to the surveys from 1987, where the original Northern Ireland survey of breeding waders, and then soon it was abundantly obviously abundantly obvious that a lot of the areas which were really great for breeding waders along the shores had become completely overgrown by gorse. And so we had a very small team back in those days, and we got some assistance from the National Trust at Crom, and we had a few days out on the loch, and we cleared all of the gorse from the low-lying shores. And the birds responded again almost immediately. Big differences in lapwing populations. Redshank responded very strongly. And in those days, the curlew were all breeding higher up on the drumlin, up on the longer vegetation, and curlew were doing quite well at that stage. I'm conscious that there'll be people listening into this this presentation perhaps are not as familiar with the breeding species that we're talking about. So this is a male lapwing, and what a fabulous creature it is. You can tell that it's a male by the very long crest that it has, and by the solid black breast and throat going up to the very dark face. And it's it's no surprise that in the work that we are doing and going to the lengths that we are, and really trying to focus our minds on what we need to do in order to create the best habitat possible for all of our key species when they come back each year onto the site. We've more recently found, and I think actually back in the early days when we were managing islands on Lower Loch Earn, I perhaps probably would have never have believed that we would get to the point where the islands were becoming so dry in the kind of back end of the spring and the beginning of the summer, that sites such as Hare Island or Fernie Island would actually dry out, and we found ourselves in situations where lapwings were leading chicks up to areas where they were expecting it to be wet, and it was no longer wet. So we've started to create quite a large number of wet features across the islands in order to maintain water throughout, particularly the back end of the spring and into the summer. I should also say at this point is that I think that a lot of people looking at breeding waders probably think that they spend their entire time looking for probing for worms and other invertebrates in soft, muddy areas. But in fact, actually, the adult curlews spend a heck of a lot of time gleaning invertebrates from the grass. So on some of our larger and more successful islands, places like Hare Island, the curlew very much spend a lot of their time eating small invertebrates, as I say, from the taller vegetation. And the nature, the reason for that really is because of the very heavy boulder clay that lies just below the surface of the islands. And curlew, which people probably just imagine seeing, down in the winter time down in Donegal Bay or many places such like that, probing for worms. On the islands of Loch Earn, it's a much harder task to survive on them. One of the species which does benefit particularly from feeding on worms are the snipe. I'm going to talk a little bit more about snipe when we come to them later on. So the curlews are becoming an iconic species, sadly, probably for all of the wrong reasons now. That back in the 80s, Fermanagh and places had fantastic populations. The Lower Loch Earn Islands certainly did. It was my predecessor, Joe McGee, who first identified the importance of the islands and to preserve them for breeding waders back in the 80s. Thank heavens he was aware of what was happening, and he persuaded RSPB to invest significantly in buying islands across the loch at that stage. I just put this picture in of a curlew relative. So this is a whimbrel. Whimbrels undertake enormous migrations every year from breeding in Iceland to coming down through Ireland and down into West Africa and wintering in West Africa over the winter months, and then taking a huge journey back up to Iceland. So we see whimbrel very frequently from kind of the back end of March on, really. And places like the new relatively new Loch Earn Golf Resort are excellent places to go and see whimbrel when they're on migration. They're very charismatic, small curlew with a lovely call, and they gather together in quite large flocks on the golf resort. So you can sometimes see in the order of certainly 100 plus or 150 birds all gathering together. But often they're mistaken, of course, for curlew, and we'll get reports from people saying that they have curlew on their site, but often in the early stages of the year, they're whimbrel coming through. So this image that I have here is kind of quite interesting. The problem that I have is that I don't have a pointer, but if you can bear with me. So in the top right, if you can see very well, there's actually a female curlew sitting on a nest. And then, sorry, that's the left, isn't it? To the top right, you've then got a very recently hatched curlew chick. And I think this picture actually just sums up how difficult it is for these birds when they hatch out, and they quite quickly move away from the nest, but they've got to get through very tall vegetation. And it's a conversation that I often have with people around the county when we're talking about what curlews really need and what's happening to them. And one of the problems that all of these waders are at risk of is hatching and getting out into very wet grassland that's too dense for them to easily get through. And in those situations, they can quite frequently die from becoming chilled as a result of being wet. Just in the bottom left, then you can see a couple of sort of larger young curlews and two adults that are walking off out of frame. So yeah, we undertake breeding wader surveys throughout the spring and early summer, and and as you can imagine, following birds like snipe and chicks of lapwing and such like, it's really not that easy to come up with very accurate figures for what the breeding success is. However, we've been doing the same system of site survey now since the very early 90s, and in most cases we've been doing all of that survey with the same people. So at least we've got very strong continuity in our staff and what they're expecting to see and how they go about accurately recording it. So in this image here, they just have 3 chicks of 3 of our key species. So at the top we have a chick snipe, which is something that we don't see very often. We naturally enough see very good numbers of snipe flying up from our feet when we're doing surveys, and we record the number of birds that are drumming and chipping as an indication of that they're breeding there on the island at that time. I should say something about snipe, and that is that they're quite unusual compared to the other breeding waders in that after they've hatched out, and there are 4 hatchlings come out, the 2 parent birds then quite often take 2 of the chicks in different directions. So the male goes one way with 2 chicks and the female goes the other way with 2 chicks. And there's a lot of evidence to say that the snipe don't come back together after that. It's quite an unusual strategy for them to have, but undoubtedly it does them well in the long run. In the bottom left, you've got a juvenile redshank, and as I've said, redshank are doing particularly well across the islands of Lower Lough Erne. And I'll just say something about that, and that is that once we saw the incredible increase in redshank populations early in the day, once we started creating areas of short and long grass quite close to each other, that you scratch your head and you wonder why redshank hadn't been doing so well for over such a wide area. And then my belief is that in general, when we're managing islands and when we're farming islands or pasture or whatever it may be for the benefit of breeding waders, it's very easy, I think, to either manage a site in such a way where you leave the vegetation relatively long, and in other cases the grazing regime might be that it grazes most of the grass down to the bottom, and hence what we end up with is 2 completely contrasting habitats that the 2 species can't really use. And so by having very short pasture very close to longer vegetation seems to be the perfect conditions for redshank to be successful. And unfortunately, in Upper Lough Erne, redshank have been doing particularly badly for very many years. And as soon as one of my colleagues, Sarah McCaffrey, spoke to one of her farmers that she was working with a couple of years ago and asked him whether it might be possible to have this combination of short and long vegetation close to each other, he was happy to go ahead, and sure enough, redshank returned to Upper Lough Erne for the first time in a number of years. So that's proving to be very successful. This picture here is Trasner Island in Lower Lough Erne. If you imagine where Devonish is, and you imagine in your mind's eye travelling north and through those small islands, the next one up is Trasner Island, and it was an island which essentially was quite well wooded, and formerly had, I know from colleagues and people who've lived their whole lives on the loch, telling me about where lapwing nested on Trasner Island. But as time went by, the trees grew up, the area of open pasture became smaller and smaller to the point where we didn't have any breeding waders on it at all. So RSPB purchased the island just 3 years ago, and we set about turning the island back into something what it once was. And there's a piece of evidence which my colleague found in the archives of Belfast and Dublin records offices about what Trasner Island looked like approximately 100 years ago. And essentially the island looked very much like what our idea was of what we wanted to create for breeding waders, because at that stage there were no waders on it. And so Trasner has largely had the vast majority of its trees removed from it in order to create a wide open landscape and to attract breeding waders and to effectively turn the layout of the island back to what it was a century or so ago. So we're looking forward to the benefits. We have had a pair of lapwing and we've had redshank on site, and we're hopeful that as the years go forward, then we're going to see a lot more in terms of productivity. So that's just a glimpse of Trasner from a distance. I put up this is a slightly out of date graphs of what was happening to our breeding waders, but essentially to give you the trend. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that it's the trend that's important, and not to get into your head if you're a surveyor or if you're looking at breeding waders for whatever reason, that you understand that the bigger picture is really important, and the longer the set of data is that you have, the more accurately you can interpret that, and you can look at ways of perhaps altering whatever the management might be in order to benefit the birds. So yeah, so I won't dwell too much. As you can see, the dwindling of breeding curlew from 87 to 2019, just very slowly on a downward trajectory, although with a few years where there's been increases in population. Breeding lapwing with a fairly positive looking trend, redshank doing particularly well, and snipe being a little bit all over the place, to be honest, and then suddenly decreasing very quickly. And in fact, in the last year, they also decreased again. So there's something that we need to investigate to understand what's going on there. So yeah, so just a few of the birds. So this is a typical kind of place where you'd find a snipe. You know, it's sitting in a very wet, muddy hollow. This is a young bird. It's got a few downy feathers on the top of the head there. We have an adult redshank, which is a fantastic beast, if you ask me. They have such brilliant colours, and I love the edges of the feathers during the breeding season. A rather pale looking juvenile redshank in the next image. I don't think we've quite got enough time to talk about it, but I would have dearly liked to have said something more about dunlin. So I think dunlin is one of Ireland's most threatened breeding bird species. Dunlin have been breeding on Lockhart for many years, but at a very low ebb. They're wonderful creatures if you ever happen to encounter them during the breeding season, because they will stand and look at you and look up at you and wonder what you are. Fortunately, this past breeding season, we had a fledged juvenile dunlin, which is a very rare occurrence in Fermanagh these days, unfortunately. I think we need to do a lot more to understand what we might be able to do to benefit dunlin. So just finishing off with a couple of images of curlew flying over, and a picture from Lusty Morrow Island taken a couple of years ago, at a time when the fortunes of curlew on that island turned around significantly. They'd been down to 0 pairs for a large number of years, and by putting in predator-proof fencing, etc., and doing a lot more work in the grassland, we were able to increase the population up to 6 pairs within a few years. So hopefully we'll be able to achieve similar things into the future. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Brad. Thank you for stepping in, and also, well, fantastic talk with some cracking photos in there, and also excellent snipe fact, which I didn't know, and we'll be going into the next quiz I ever do. And I think a talk full of optimism, actually, just demonstrating that actually some relatively small tweaks, habitat tweaks, can really turn around the fortunes of some of these species, some larger than others, but especially with the talk about the mention of your colleague, just talking about the different mowing systems, is absolutely superb.
If there's one thing I can say, Sam, and that is that, excuse me, if you're doing habitat management for waders, you need to constantly reassess what you're doing all of the time. Keep talking to your colleagues and other people who've been on the land for far more years than I certainly have, and keep talking about it, and keep creating and keep trying things. And that's going to be the best way forward to save these fantastic species.
But what a brilliant message to have to everyone. And of course, part of the purpose of things like tonight's event, you know, sharing that knowledge, sharing that learning, learning from each other and trying new things out as well. So thank you very much, Brad. So Alan, hopefully we've got some IT support now, and I believe Heather is going to share her screen with your PowerPoint. Oh, here it comes. Ah, super. And we are ready to go, I think. So,
excellent. Okay. So apologies to everyone, and thank you, Brad, for stepping in. That was great. I'm not just sure how far we got, but anyway, I remember talking about the collaborative approach, which Michael already has alluded to, and I think that's very important. Now, the aims of the EFS Hire scheme are to restore, preserve, and enhance biodiversity, improve water management and water quality, reduce soil erosion, improve soil management, foster carbon, reduce greenhouse gas. So the reason I'm showing this slide, it's covering a lot of bases. It's setting itself out to achieve a lot. Sometimes when you address a wide range of environmental issues, and it already has been touched on by Brad as well today, sometimes what addresses one issue may not be the answer for another. For example, you know, if we're removing trees for breeding withers, at the same time we're encouraging people to plant trees or allow their scrub to develop or transition into woodland for carbon capture. So it's not one solution that doesn't really fit. So it's all a matter of well, balance. And was listening to one of the Chagas hedgerow workshops last week, or this past week. Catherine Keenan was talking about hedgerows, and she was making the point about life as a compromise, and managing for biodiversity is certainly a compromise. So we need to take care with some of our solutions. So this evening I'm really going to look at the first of those aims, and that's to restore, preserve and enhance biodiversity, because for the breeding waders, this is really where our focus is within the scheme. So next slide, please, Heather. Thanks. So, right, aiming to restore, preserve and enhance biodiversity on targeted sites. The outcomes to be achieved through improved habitat management. Now, the reason I'm referring to that, rather than manage for species within the environmental farming scheme, we tend to manage the habitats, and the species will follow, and that, by and large, that's what we do. So to get the habitat management correct, the species should follow, with a few exceptions. That's the way we roll the scheme out. And it's delivered via site-specific remedial management plans. And Michael already mentioned in his talk earlier about being one of the planners who draws up these plans. So they're very site-specific at farm level. And on these hire schemes on designated sites, these are drawn up by external planners, and they're submitted to us then for approval to make sure that they meet the requirements of the designated sites. So that's the way the scheme actually works. So next slide, please. We talked about targeting. There are 3 tiers of land within the EFS hire. The first one is the special areas of conservation, SACs. We also have the SPAs and Ramsars, and they sit right at the top of the tree. Those are our most important priority as far as entry into the environmental farming scheme goes. Next along comes the ASSIs. Those are ones which aren't within the SACs or SPAs, so they come next. Finally, then we have got key priority species outside the designated site network, and many of these sites are very important for the likes of breeding waders and curlew and what have you. So you're talking about your species-rich grassland and things like that. So as far as entry into the scheme is concerned, we obviously prioritise tier 1 first, then tier 2 and tier 3. But in our last intake, now we were accepting farms into the scheme which have any of those 3 priority habitats. So that's the tiering. So next slide, please. Yeah, I've lost my place here, and I was following my own presentation, which is a dangerous thing to say. Obviously, what's in this for the farmers? The first thing I'll say, it is a scheme which lasts for 5 years. It's a voluntary scheme, so they're coming in of their own accord. And by means of reward, you'll see payments there for breeding weight or remedial management. They get £195 per hectare per year while they're in the scheme. For purple murgrass and rush pasture and remedial management, they get £180 per hectare per year. And then when we get onto Moorland, which we're talking usually about larger sites, the payment is 40 hectares, £20 per hectare, 20 after 50 hectares in size. And the more you have in, the smaller the payments get in the end. But you might ask yourselves, why is one payment higher than the other? Well, the way the payments are actually work for this is not paid because of their environmental value. All of the payments within the scheme, and this is the only way we were allowed to pay for these schemes of the Rural Development Programme, it was based on income forgone and costs incurred. Now, the income forgone is if the farmer hadn't entered the environmental scheme, how much is he realistically forfeiting because of his environmental management? If he went on to produce agricultural produce to its maximum, how much would he realistically have earned? And that's how all of these schemes are costed. It was quite difficult to explain that to some farmers, why they're only getting a certain amount for some of their land, which they would think is maybe contributing more in terms of environmental gain than some of the areas which are getting a high payment for. So now moving forward, I suspect under the next schemes, we're moving towards a scheme whereby that it will be based on outcomes. So rather than income forgone, it will be something that will be along the basis of paid for output in terms of environmental gain. So that's where we are. So next slide, please. Okay, so here what actually happens within one of these remedial management options. So for the breeding weight or remedial management, there's no new drainage is allowed while the person's in the scheme. Routine rush control is by cutting and not between the 15th of March and the 15th of July for obvious reasons. I mentioned cutting there. There's no chemical rush control within the EFS hire. So that's any control of rushes within the scheme must be done through cutting with no chemical control. No chemical fertilizer or lime applications between 1st of February and 15th of July. Again, no field operations between 15th of April and 15th of July as well. The sort of field operations we're talking about here is going on with tractors, perhaps rollers for obvious reasons where it would not be good on a nesting site. So no tree or hedge planting within the site either. And again, from the 15th of April to the 15th of July, the sward height should not exceed 30 centimetres. Cattle must not be released directly onto breeding wader sites after being wintered indoors. And then if you have seen cattle getting out in spring, you'll see again that it wouldn't be a good mix with breeding birds. So that's what's required under the breeding wader remedial management option. Now, I said earlier that we manage for habitat rather than species. Now, why we would manage, why we have this breeding weight or remedial management option is whether there's no priority habitat in that particular field or area of land. So this is where there isn't something like species-rich grassland, but yet there is a record of recent breeding wader activity. This is what we would promote on the farm. So next slide then, please. A lot of what we have our breeding waders on is prescribed the purple murgrass and rush pasture remedial management. And this is really our species-rich grassland. And this is a lot of the breeding waders will be found on these fields. So excess grass may be safe for hair size, but not cut until after the 15th of July. Extensive grazing, and normally for the species-rich grassland would be from the 1st of May to the end of December, the maximum stocking density of one livestock unit per hectare. Now, where there are breeding waders, we would restrict that further, and there's stocking density restriction flexibility just to take account of the breeding waders. No grazing between the 1st of January and 30th of April inclusive. no chemical rush control again, and no organic or chemical fertilizer permitted. So in the breeding wader, where we have got no underlying habitat with the breeding waders, they would have been allowed to apply for chemical fertilizer, but under where there is species rich grassland, there is to be no chemical fertilizer permitted. Might wonder why we've these options in place, and really I think before going any further, we need to maybe consider why this is needed, or what has happened that these measures are now being considered. Because I remember, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember healthy populations of breeding curlew. I remember my childhood growing up on a farm where in the late 60s and 70s, curlew were plentiful. I can remember exactly where curlew nested on the farm. Sadly to say, they are no longer there. So, what has happened to them? My personal observation, I'll just share this with you. There's four really main reasons I've seen this happen over the course of my lifetime. Certainly, the drive towards increased productivity from agricultural marginal land, where a lot of curlew would have nested. So a lot of that land has been drained, improved grassland there, and really a general decrease in biodiversity with that type of pasture, as you can imagine. Other cases, and I'm thinking particularly of where I remember the curlew from my childhood, we had change in land use, and where the curlew once nested, there's now a fine conifer forest. So obviously they've been displaced because of conifers being planted. I've down here also on my note here that this increased predation, change in land use often adds to predator burden, where the conditions in cover for predators, they're often juxtaposed breeding wader habitat. I'm thinking of some of the forests that are just sitting right alongside excellent breeding wader habitat, yet they're having not only have they displaced the waders from the habitat that the forest is growing on, it's actually had a serious impact on maybe very suitable habitat alongside. So increased predator burden is a problem, particularly where that has happened, and also because of habitat fragmentation. You see perfectly good habitat being eaten away almost at the edges. You can see it all over the countryside. So that's a problem. And finally, neglect or abandonment in extreme cases, so where we've got wall-to-wall dense rush or scrub, and that's why we've built in this scrub control, rush control within some of our options to try and make it more wader friendly. So there's nothing wrong with some rushes, and look at some Brad's slides where some rush beside the short grass was of a great benefit. We don't want to get rid of all of the rushes, but certainly wall-to-wall rushes will certainly not be a good idea, and that's why it's built into the management under AFS. If we move on to the next slide, please. Right. This might ask where do we go from here? We've had 5 intakes of AFS, and we've now we've over 900 site-specific management plans in place, not all for breeding waders, but for site-specific management plans in place. And we're currently, we are about to release around 400 more offers to people to begin their agreement on the 1st of January. So we will have well over 1,000 agreements in place. So, and after in the early spring or in spring, we hope to open for tranche 6. For another intake, so that'll be open in spring 2022, and these plans will be drawn up during this next summer, hopefully to begin their 5-year agreement on 1st of January 2023. So the scheme is continuing on. They will change, and they're being worked on at the moment. As I say, the next round of schemes will be different, and there'll probably be more emphasis on the outcomes as opposed to managing income forgone, cost incurred, as we have done in this scheme. It's an online application. It's very easy it's actually easy for the farmer to apply for this scheme. Very easy, just has to identify the fields that they want to apply for, and then they nominate a planner, and the planner takes it from there. And we have we've got quite a register of planners available on our website. So that's how that works. The whole details of the scheme, and there's an awful lot in the scheme. Breeding weight is only one part of it, so there's a scheme overview available on our website, and you should look at that for interest. That's really all I want to say, and apologies again for the mess up with our presentation. But we're nearly 2 years into COVID. That's the first time that has happened to me, so it's not pleasant. So thank you very much. I'm glad to take questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Alan. And yeah, no worries on the technical abilities. I think it's all part of the virtual bingo that we now play with all of these events, aren't they? So it's bound to happen to someone. It's just unfortunate it was you. But I think you did a stellar job. So thank you to all our speakers. So we are running just slightly over time. We're a minute over time. There's not been an awful lot of questions come in, but I think in order to end on time, what we'll do is we'll actually collate all these questions, we'll pose them to our speakers, and we'll actually send out the answers to everyone who's registered into this event. So just to say thank you again to all of our speakers and to those organising it and doing all the background work that you may or may not have seen or heard this evening. But Heather, is definitely big thank you to you for helping our speakers and for facilitating tonight's event, and everyone else who helped to make tonight happen. And just to let people know that there is the third and final one of these virtual events on Tuesday, the 18th of January, same time, 7 p.m. That theme will be on securing the future for breeding waders, by looking at what they mean sort of culturally and within the communities, and how communities have got involved to try and turn things around, with one of the key speakers being Mary Colwell, who's a producer and writer, and is author of the book Curlew Moon, which sort of talks about her 500-mile walk from the west of Ireland. I believe she started somewhere near Lockhart, to the east coast of England to raise awareness of curlew's status or declining status. She's also chair of the Curlew Recovery Partnership in England. So I hope that many of you can join us back in January, and golly, I suppose if we don't see you before, then wishing everyone on here a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. That's the first time I'm going to say that. Thank you again to our speakers. And as I said, the link to the recording, as well as the questions and answers to the questions, will be circulated after the event and will be put online, I think, on the Lockhart Landscape website. So if you have any questions from tonight, you can send them through to Heather at heather.gott@rspb.uk. She's put it in the chat box and also sent a link. So thank you again, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and thank you for joining us tonight.